the members of our policy roundtable assembling. So let me just check to make sure that we do have all the members of the policy roundtable. I see Harold and I see Anita. Do we have David and Tom back yet? I hope so. There's David.
Yes.
All right. And we have Dr. Gupta with us, I think. How about Melissa? Yes, there's Melissa. All right, I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves in 2 seconds, but you can, I'm glad you've got your cameras on, and I think we can forge ahead. Okay, so we have an hour and a half, which always seems like a lot of time, but ends up not feeling adequate to the topics that we're going to try to cover. And I want to welcome a couple new folks to join us at the policy roundtable. We have Tom and we have David, the patient experts who are with us throughout the course of the day. So they don't need to reintroduce themselves. Well, why don't we start with Harold, just give a brief introduction to yourself. And we have your conflicts of interest, obviously, if you're an employee of a company, we put that up on the slide, but if there's anything else about potential influences on your judgment, please do tell us. Harold, why don't you introduce yourself?
So Harold Carter is mentioned, or Vice President over Pharma Contracting and Strategy here at Express Scripts. Obviously, no other disclosures to provide outside of my work for Express Scripts, which is a part of Cigna. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Harold. And again, like this morning, we have Dr. D'Souza and we have Dr. Gupta who made a public comment, but just to, again, actually, I can't quite see Dr. Gupta, so I hope she is with us.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
I see you. Okay, great. Thank you. Unfortunately, Dr. Rajkumar had to step out. He said for just about 30 minutes at most, he thought. So that means that Dr. D'Souza, you are carrying the flag for all clinicians in the United States, just for a short while. No problem, right? You've got this. And another new person with us is Melissa Posatrigo. I hope I pronounced your last name right. But why don't you tell us who you are and any potential conflicts?
Thank you so much. And yes, you are one of the few people that pronounced my name perfectly on the first try. So my name is Melissa Posatrigo. I work for Oncology Analytics, and I have no conflicts of interest to disclose.
Why don't you tell people what Oncology Analytics is?
Sure. So Oncology Analytics is a prior authorization company. We do clinical reviews for prior authorization cases for providers all throughout the United States as well as Puerto Rico, and we also do some work with the life sciences, although that's a separate branch from what I do. I also do, as part of my job at Oncology Analytics, I'm also involved in pharmacy consulting, where I do provide formulary reviews and guidance, as well as writing policies or editing existing policies, and provide support for PNT meetings.
Okay, so is it fair to say, because people are trying to put you in one part of the zoo here, you know what payers do, you know what providers do in terms of dealing with payers around coverage and prior auth. You don't formally represent either. You kind of advise the field. Is that a fair description?
That's very fair to say, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll turn to you for some interesting insights. All right, I have my kind of talking points here to lead me through this. I want to start actually with reflecting back with the patients. We've had these votes. You've seen lots of tables. You've seen lots of numbers. Did we squeeze the celebration out of this day when we have new, exciting treatments, for patients who, at this stage of multiple myeloma, have not had a lot to draw upon? Have we missed anything in terms of emphasizing the benefits that you'd like to say? Let's come back and celebrate that again. Tom, looks like you're up. I know David is with us, but please feel free to start in. Oops, you're still muted though.
Thank you. As I've said before, CAR-T has impacted me in truly positive ways. The one thing that I didn't mention was that it's the first, so I'm now 14 months out. I'm still, as I said, MRD negative. And I think I'm aware that the statistics are 11 months of remission, so I'm ahead of that curve. And I think for the first time, I see the possibility of a year or even 2 years ahead of me, which I've never felt before. So I think it's been transformational in many ways.
All right, that's great. Because I know sometimes, because we are deep into the evidence, we can start to feel a little bit dry when it comes to how it feels from the patient side or the family side. But if we're talking about that sense of excitement, let's also just, I think, talk about some of the other issues that came up around what happens when something new gets started like this, and it's in the academic centers and it's with the thought leaders in the field, and it often doesn't get into the hands of poorer patients, of patients from communities of color or rural communities and other kinds of areas in the same kind of fair way. And I just wonder if any, and Harold, I may even talk to you or turn to you, because I think you had expressed earlier to someone on the team that as an insurer, you think, as a pharmacy benefit manager, you think about a bit about this, and whether it's transportation or other things. I mean, you're thinking about, how to make sure that the access seems more fair and helps address inequities. Can you say more about how you guys think this through?
Yeah, so we'll come to the price piece, right? Because I think we'll have our position or belief on just generally how that works and what that means here. But there's so many transformative and newer products that are coming to the marketplace that have the ability to really change the lives for folks for the better. And one of those big issues, right, is, as you mentioned before, it's not only kind of racial disparities that exist, but also other sort of economic disparities. So as it was mentioned, you may have it's not only the question of does the insurance, is it covered by the insurance, right? So that's one piece of the puzzle. And a lot of times I think folks say, well, it's covered, so they go use it. But for many of these patient populations, right, there's many factors that are sort of falling on top of that. One is, it was mentioned before very well, that oftentimes these aren't treatments that are going to be in facilities that may be for rural Americans or those of smaller cities. You have to go to a larger city for that. And then when you put it in that frame of reference, then on top of that, you also have to have, a lot of times it's not only the patient, but one of their family members that's going to have to travel with them or miss work or do something of that nature. So now you're talking about a financial implication that's associated with that family. And again, some folks kind of highlighted this before. When you put all of that onto folks, it's not only is the drug covered, and the treatment drug covered, quite frankly, but secondly, it's, can you actually get to a facility to do that? And then secondly, you're going to be missing work and other kind of factors that are needed to continue to maintain your coverage and do all those things. And so when you bring those all together, it's not just a challenge when you think about it from someone in a city, but rural has a big impact too. When you look at it from a socioeconomic perspective and from a race perspective, you add that compounded issue on top of that, where a patient may not be have coverage that actually allows them to be able to afford the medication or cover under their benefit. And so when you think about all of these factors, whether it's CAR T, quite frankly, it's gene therapy, it's a lot of these treatments, you not only have to think about covering it, but also how do you put a potential benefit around that patient as they go through this different process. So it's so much more complicated than just the drug itself or just the treatment itself. It actually comes everything around that. And so there are many payers in the marketplace and others that are kind of figuring out, what is the structure, does that look like? Because this is going to be more and more of an issue moving forward, whether we're talking about CAR T, gene therapy, potentially Parkinson's disease out there, potentially Alzheimer's products. If Biogen gets that approved, we'll see what happens there. So it's a much broader conversation in the healthcare system that we have to kind of think about.
Okay, thanks. I think it is really helpful to know, or to help people think that the benefit in a sense has to wrap around the coverage of a specific treatment in order for it to actually be able to get to people. Do you have any, like, if we were to try to establish best practices, and you wanted to hope that everybody would do the same thing, because if you're going to offer something, it might be more expensive and look better, and you would like for it to be equal and fair across all different insurers. But like, what could we put into recommendations even around insurers should do to address inequities? And as you said, it's not just racial, but that's obviously a part of it. Anything in specifics that you would say we should do? And I'll go around and have other people chime in too.
Yeah, so I'll provide a few thoughts to consider. I don't think you can necessarily say someone should or have to do this. It's going to be unique to the patient populations that they serve, to the Americans that they serve. But it's, to me, it's where, whenever you're structuring these benefits, understanding where these treatments facilities are and the patients and the Americans that you serve. And if you know that there's that disparity, how do you look at that? And so are there certain benefits to assist in covering travel, things of that nature? And you actually see that quite commonly done in like transplant, right? Where people will have transplant benefits and things of that nature. And so that's not a sort of an unknown thing. So there's certain things that you want to consider that those patients are going to be out of work or their family members, and how do you sort of assist them? There's certainly insurance and different types of insurance that you can get, not life insurance, but while you're out, et cetera. So there's certain benefits that I think today folks can buy into just in case they ever fall into these. But it's really taking a more serious look at what that looks like. What are your members doing today? Is there any other things that you can offer? I think you're starting to see a lot more payers offer those sort of things. But it's certainly an area where you continue to see that there's a tremendous still need for it.
Okay, I may come back to you even on some of those specifics, but let me move to David because he had his hand up. Dave?
I think it's important to note that this applies to all medicine, and should stipulate that point. Also, in dealing, I talk to multiple myeloma patients all the time, all over the country, and I tell them from the start, you really got to go get a second opinion. No matter where you start, go get a second. And you need to go someplace for treatment where they treat a lot of patients, because the data are clear. The more of something a doctor or a medical center does, the better the outcomes are. That's difficult, by the way, for some of the patients I talk to, because they can't go get that second opinion at Dana-Farber or Johns Hopkins or what have you. Having said that, and Harold just talked about benefits that enable people to go to centers of excellence. I was stunned when I became a transplant patient 10 years ago. I haven't had a transplant, by the way. My cells are in the freezer at Dana-Farber in Boston. I don't know if my doctor will ever use them. We talk about it every 6 months. But when I became a transplant patient, my insurance, I was on private insurance then, I wasn't retired yet, I wasn't in Medicare, had a benefit of $10,000 for me to go to a center of excellence to cover the very stuff Harold is talking about. It was for travel, it was for a hotel, it was for meals, it was for me and my family, my spouse. This really makes a difference in enabling people to go get the best care and to go to a place where I think this works for the insurer too, where the outcomes are better. So when I tell people this, sometimes they're stunned, but I put through my bills for travel, and they were paid. And so I believe that model has really utility in terms of promoting better health outcomes, but also in dealing with the issue of disparate access to high quality treatment.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Do you think, though, it's a risk that the people who have those kinds of benefits built in to their coverage are already going to be at that higher socioeconomic level? They're already, I mean, these are not going to be the exchange packages available to the, to the common man, if you will.
But
So I'm worried if that almost doesn't.
they should be. That's
They
my
should
point.
be. I guess that's the recommendation, is that somehow they should be.
Well, I think there's so much, and what I'd say too is second opinion service, certainly agree with that. We've done some things where we've allowed payers, not forcing patients to actually do second opinion, but offering it as an option if they choose to to go after that, right? So providing them a pathway to do that, something we've been doing for some time now. What I would say is, to your point, Steve, though, right? I think that's what you're specifically talking about is we know that there's a much more fragile population. One could argue, are those patients probably sometimes sitting more in Medicaid and things of that nature? On how do we work with states for certain solutions to make sure that they can offer those benefits? But certainly, I would tell you, David's experience, while great, isn't always the options are always going to be the case for everyone in the healthcare system. And a lot of that's going to come with how do we invest in, whether that's Medicaid, it's Medicare times, where there are gaps to sort of address some of those things. But as you think about it, I think that's those are going to be the things that lead to the most success. Now, what I'd say, and I know you probably don't want me to go here yet, is we got to also work on the cost of the drug, right? Because that squeezes the ability for the healthcare system sometimes to be able to afford patients some of these additional sort of options for treatment.
Well, I think we're going to spend some time talking about pricing and payment. I think somehow we'll get there.
Steve, didn't Medicare just allow Novartis to pay for the cost of transporting people to get Kymriah and not treat it as a kickback?
I know, I doubt that they can do it directly through Medicare, but actually it's a policy area that I'm not very familiar with. I was going to ask Dr. Gupta if she knew, but then I'm going to come to the two clinical experts too, because there are aspects of this that are directly related to your actions. But Dr. Gupta, if you're still with us, do you know anything about either your company's actions or any general approach to companies trying to help patients with the broader aspects of having access to these? And we'll talk about the pricing and other things later, but anything around that, if you're with us? She may not be, because I'm not seeing her picture right now. Maybe I can ask her. Oh, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm having difficulties with my network. So, we are definitely committed at GSK to help patients access our medications, and for decades have put a number of programs in place that will help ensure that eligible patients who need access are able to receive the therapy. We work very closely with the groups and this GSK, together with GSK Oncology, we are able to offer patients and healthcare professionals a variety, if I may use that word, of access and reimbursement services for all of the GSK Oncology products.
So that covers the financial aspects. We were just curious, we may want to suggest, for instance, in the recommendations that come out, that this is a joint or kind of shared responsibility between payers and manufacturers, perhaps, to contribute to the financial aspects of transportation, of hotels, whatever it takes to kind of help patients get access to treatments that are really only available, at least for a while, at kind of a handful of centers of excellence or academic centers. Do you know if is it legal for the companies, your company, for instance, to do that, or does Medicare forbid that kind of assistance?
I have to pass. I'm not very sure of the process. Sorry.
That's all right. We'll look into it. Okay. Interesting topic. We've already gotten into some aspects of it. I would actually just love to know from Anita and Vincent, what are the barriers on the clinician side for the clinicians, for the patients who may be in underserved communities? Is it that they know about these new treatments and just they're not kind of plugged in to the center of excellence, and so they can't prescribe it? Is it an education aspect? I mean, what does the professional aspect of this look like if we're trying to figure out how to improve? If we turned around in 5 years and we wanted to see a fair distribution of the use of CAR T in multiple myeloma, What would it take from the clinician side?
So I guess I can get started. So one of the things that's unique about the US is that the majority of myeloma patients are diagnosed and treated in the community. So they're managed by community oncologists. And this is a little different if you were to compare with, say, the rest in Europe, where a majority are treated at academic centers. So first off, and I'll keep using transplant as a reference because I think transplant centers might also be considered as a surrogate for that tertiary care, access to clinical trials and all these newer treatments. So getting to a transplant center requires a referral by the community oncologist. And while we have this great perspective from David that he sought a second opinion, the majority of myeloma patients might not seek that second opinion on their own unless they are referred to a transplant center. So I think that can upfront bring that access issue. And we know from transplant studies where we have looked at national databases and compared with SEER incidences, if you look at how many myeloma patients get a transplant, that number is something like 40% if you're a white American, but it's 20% if you're a Black American. And that's taking into account the incidence that's much higher in Black Americans. And it's even lower if you're Hispanic, it's only about 15%. So we know that there is this huge access issue that we think part of it might be just the fact that they are never referred to a transplant center. But we have looked at even after they come to a transplant center, there's still a disparity in by race in who gets a transplant versus not. So again, we don't know if that's the same when we look at these newer treatments, but putting CAR T as something that's just as involved, maybe even more complicated than doing a transplant, I think those are some of the things like I think about.
Yeah, we actually, when we were talking about lupus nephritis treatments a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the idea that health insurers, health plans, should come up with an internal quality metric such that they would measure their own patients, their own members' access to these new treatments, and in a sense, give themselves credit, but evaluate their own performance in outreach and making sure that patients should, have access, equal access to new treatments. And clinicians' specialties aren't organized on a data kind of basis to be able to do that. But it seems like a good, I wish it were a target that all kind of stakeholders could somehow orient around and make happen. Vincent, did you have any specific thoughts on ways that either the clinical world or other stakeholders could take specific actions to try to get us to a better outcome on the use of these new treatments?
Boy, it's a very hard problem. And I think, if you think about even the patients we hear from, are patients who are well insured, whose primary concern is out-of-pocket expense. The patients who are affected are just like rest of society, which is more worried about the actual insurance cost and whether they can even afford insurance, let alone things. So we hardly hear from the patients that we need to hear from. They're not in our patient support groups. They're not in our ASH meetings. They're not attending. Even the doctors taking care of them are not in these places. And so we just need to make a big effort for education and informing them of all these advances, which they might not even be aware of. I've heard of, people, I did just a random survey of people if they knew about the National Medical Association, which is a 100-year-old organization for just African-American physicians. And most people, most doctors don't even know about that. Dr. Edith Mitchell told me, if you're going to talk to people about disparity in myeloma and access to care and all the great things that are happening, you keep talking at ASH meetings, you're not going to reach the doctors who are taking care of the patients who need to know about this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, access. And without sounding like Senator Sanders, I think we do have a problem where it's not possible for many patients to get through the door of referral institutions. if they don't have good insurance. So somehow we have to change that, and universal healthcare of some form where people can access the help they need, even if they have a referral. But I think one of the good things that happened with COVID, and I hope that ICER or David Mitchell or somebody can do this. There's a lot of us physicians who are willing to help out, and I think now we have recognized that through telemedicine, through social media, and all these various forums we have, we can actually provide second opinions to large groups of patients who need it. And I'd be happy to talk to them about this is what's involved, this is what it takes, these are the patients who need to call, and this is how you get access, one-on-one or in groups. But we can make these second opinions more feasible because they don't actually even need to travel to know when and what's available.
That's a very important idea, and I think we should note that. I see some good hands up, so let me go to, and I know we've got hands up within our own CEPAC members. Thank you, by the way, for sending the comments that you are. I think that's helpful, and we'll capture many of them in our discussion. I'm going to turn first to the folks who have hands up on the roundtable, and if we have time, I'll go outside. And believe it or not, we're almost a half hour in, and we haven't talked about clinical, kind of care guidelines or any of these other things. We're talking about the big picture, which is exactly what we should be talking about. Tom?
So I'd like to emphasize that in my 8-year journey with multiple myeloma, I have belonged to 2 support groups, one specifically for multiple myeloma. I've been going to UCSF for the last 5 years, and my perception, which I think is fairly accurate, I see very, very few people of color. Most of the patients at UCSF, they have a large waiting room, they have a large infusion center, just about 90 point something white. And that's true of our support groups as well. Just thought I would mention that.
Thank you. Seeing it at that level must be very striking. David?
I want to go back to something Harold said that is important, and trying not to hit these points too hard, given my day job. And that is, price is important. Price is a barrier for people. And while it is terrific that my insurer understood the value of sending me to a center of excellence and was willing to underwrite it, that's great. It is the fact that Medicare has allowed Novartis now to pay for travel, lodging, meals, and other out-of-pocket expenses for people who are going to get Kymriah, and I sent that clip along. It's from Fierce Pharma. But patients should not have to rely on the largesse of private drug corporations who can decide to give or not give this kind of support, which is designed to benefit them. And it should be available to people, whether it's through Medicaid, if that's where it has to be for the income or for the population we're talking about, or through the ACA plans or through their employer plans. People should be able to access affordable treatment and affordable drugs. And it should not be the ownership for who gets what should not reside with private corporations, drug corporations. It should be a policy of the United States of America that these things are made available so that we break through these barriers of disparities and get care to people regardless of their wealth.
All right, thanks. Harold?
Yeah, a few things. So one, I'm not, in full disclosure, I put this, I'm not sure aware of what Medicare and Medicaid does do today from a travel benefit perspective. So I'll set that. But I do think is we're talking about providing resources to go to areas where a patient can actually get treatment. One of the things that I think is so important for us to sort of think about is, instead of pulling people out of their sort of communities, how do you bring those resources into their communities? And what I mean by that is a lot of times we can sit here and pontificate, right, around what we think a community needs or what we think they don't need, et cetera. but so much in healthcare. One of the things I think we have to think about is how do you invest in those communities and ask them what they need so that they're supportive, because the best way to get someone on treatment, right, is starting at the community level and making sure that the best way they're going to be on treatment, stay on treatment, is if they can get so in their community. And so there's so many things like that I think we also have to think about as a healthcare system. So just something to think about as we talked about travel benefits and all those things. That's because the resources today may not always be in those communities. So we have to see the best place to put them. But when you change that paradigm in that conversation, I think you can sort of move the needle. And there's been some things, while not in oncology, that we've seen and invested in as an organization where you've actually seen some positive outcomes there. So just thinking about more of the communities, starting at the community first, is going to continue to be important.
All right, thanks. I'm going to ask Greg Kerfman if he has a quick question, and then we're going to start to move through clinical coverage, pricing, and research, which is a lot to cover still. Greg?
Thank you, Steve. In terms of expanding utilization of CAR T, our focus today has been on data that has been developed in patients at a pretty late stage of the illness, at a time when they failed multiple therapies. And despite that, we're seeing some pretty positive results. And the question that I have is it now time to begin to do some clinical trials of CAR T earlier in an earlier phase of myeloma, which would allow us to compare CAR T therapy with existing therapies in truly randomized settings, which I think would be very helpful. And it also would raise the possibility that this might be even more useful in earlier stage patients. So I'd be very interested in the response of the clinical experts.
Thank you, Greg. Let me actually, because that ties in so well with the research agenda that I wanted to build a little bit later, let me hold off on asking them to answer that question, because it's a central one to how we want to think of what is the right agenda for the research that we need. How much does it need to cement the effectiveness in the late stage versus moving rapidly into earlier stages? So let me ask them to plant that seed, and we'll definitely come back to it. Thanks. Okay, so I want to talk now, and obviously when we talk about clinical, it starts to overlap with some of the coverage considerations. And it seems like here the three big areas are retreatment, with CAR Ts, switching between CAR Ts. Let's say you have one CAR T and it didn't work, or it did, and then you have a relapse, and then do you do the next CAR T, a different CAR T, or switching between belantamab and CAR Ts within this kind of BCMA group. Clinically, where do you think the field will be for the next year or two, Vincent and Anita? Will they be looking to kind of rapidly cycle through the different CAR Ts? Will it be Blenrep first and then CAR T in reserve? Can you give kind of payers and others your perspective on what the clinical expert view of this is going to look like? Anita, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think probably all of the above. Sometimes it depends on the clinical context. So in a patient who's progressing very rapidly and it's an aggressive clinical progression, sometimes there's just not time to get the CAR T, that whole 4-week period that's needed to prep, get the leukapheresis done, get the CAR T cells manufactured. You just don't have that luxury of time. So in that setting, something that's just off the shelf, an ADC, a BiTE, might be more practical. So that's one of the things that goes into the decision. But once they've had one BCMA-directed treatment, if there is progression, right away, do you go to another BCMA-directed, or do you sequence to a different class of drugs? So these are all really good clinical questions. We are still learning how to go through them. And I think some of this data is still in evolution. There's a lot of clinical trials that are ongoing. So I think, what I say now might be a little different from what we do a year from now.
Vincent, what's your view?
Yeah, I think over the next year, we're going to find out what would be the most cost-effective sequence, going to CAR T first and then belantamab, or the other way around. And then, you know, pretty soon we're going to have bispecifics also against BCMA. And so initially it'll be based on clinical need, but if the clinical need is like, you know, any of them is reasonable, then I would probably favor the CAR T approach first, because then you can get your maximum value. And then even if you try belantamab, you'll know whether in 3 weeks, whether it's working or not. If you do it the other way around, I think it'll be just more expensive without any greater thing. So I think that's one consideration. And then the other one is that myeloma therapy is not going to get any less expensive in the near future. There are two bispecifics, one by Janssen, talquetamab, and the other one cevostamab. Both are bispecifics, but they're not targeting BCMA. And they both have shown 60% response rate in the most recent ASH meeting. So they both will probably get approved for maybe, I don't know what you say, hexta refractory patients or septa refractory patients. And soon you will be sequencing the BCMA treatments, and then you will have the first bispecific, and then if that doesn't work, the second bispecific.
So how would you, oh boy, now I want to jump into the research agenda, because how are you going to actually try to do these sequential? You and I have talked about sequential trials before and how difficult they are when the landscape keeps changing underneath your feet. But it sounds like from what you're saying that there's not going to be one overarching paradigm in the short term where everybody's going to feel like you're nuts if you don't start with Blenrep first and then go to CAR T, or the other way around. You'll see a variety of approaches taken. And that might include doctors who feel like a patient who progresses after the first CAR T either would get the same CAR T again or the other CAR T, and or switch to another BCMA, as you said, to Blenrep if it was CAR T, or the other way around. Let me ask maybe Melissa now, since you talk, and as we heard earlier, you have a broad view of what payers and clinicians are thinking about and dealing with prior auth. So Blenrep has been out there for a while, et cetera. But now with the CAR Ts, one approved and the other one seems likely to come. What do you think in terms of perspectives on the choices that payers will have? What will they be thinking? Will they be thinking we just have to let this area be and not try to manage it at all, and let the doctors do different sequences and switch back and forth? What are they going to be thinking about what prior auth should look like in this area? Oops, I'm sorry, you're still muted.
Thank you. So in my experience with these payers right now, in consultation with them and in terms of myeloma treatments, they really come to us for assistance with outlining their policies as close to best fit the need of the patient, right? To ensure that the drug is being used in the correct line of therapy for the right patient population, that you're taking into account safety, any like safety concerns. I haven't gotten too much requests for advice in terms of whether to try a Blenrep first or a CAR T first. Mostly like their approach in policy writing has been more in staying in line with the NCCN guidelines, which doesn't necessarily say to use Blenrep. Well, it says to use CAR T further down the line. So I guess the best way I could say it right now is that the question of using one or the other first hasn't come up at this time. And also being aware that it's an ongoing, it's a fluid situation where things can change. So their concerns, of course, with the CAR T is the sticker price of it. There's like the sticker shock of it. Aside from the actual cost of the drug, which I think everybody is acutely aware of, it's also what comes along with that drug, the the tocilizumab, the potential for an ICU stay. On the outpatient side, I mean, patients, and I know CAR T for myeloma is not there just yet on the outpatient side, but should that come, because there are centers that are trying to incorporate CAR T on the outpatient side. I mean, ensuring that they have like the right support for all those things on a clinic level as well. So just, I feel like there's a lot of work to do still with ironing all these kinks out, and CAR Ts are being approved at such a rapid rate right now that I think like the payer world is still trying to like catch up to how best to serve their patients, their members.
Right. Well, I mean, as you know, I mean, some or many patients will worry that payers trying to catch up will sometimes put just a blanket over things and try to snuff it out early or something like that. They don't want to look like they're the easy insurer on the block, et cetera. So, but you're not hearing of any people talking about, for instance, if you have one CAR T, you can't use it again.
Sorry, I can clarify. That's a very clear thing where they are not allowing sequential CAR Ts.
So right now you're seeing policies that are saying if you have one, let's say it's ide-cel, and you relapse, they would not approve. Well, cilta-cel isn't even approved yet.
It's not approved yet, yeah. But generally speaking, broadly, like in these CAR T-cell policies, at like the general umbrella section of for all CAR T policies will say clearly, if a patient has had treatment with one CAR T, they're not eligible for future CAR T. So it's like a once in a lifetime shot, basically. Once in a lifetime infusion, I should say.
And is that universal? The majority, the minority? What would you say?
Of course, I haven't like worked very closely with every payer, but I would say like on larger size payers, I would say all the ones that I've worked with, that's their stance right now. Again, because there's no data like to support sequential use just yet.
One last question, then I'd love Harold's response or perspective. We heard earlier about, at least from one patient, our team heard that they had received a CAR T and had responded and were doing well, but their doctor kept them on maintenance therapy. And I guess the clinical experts, what they think of that. But from an insurer perspective, have you seen any policies that address what other drugs a patient could be on after CAR T, or they have not tried to manage that part?
Specific to the myeloma world, no. Again, because the Abecma was just recently approved, I think that the policies are still in the works. Their policies may not have been finalized yet. For other CAR Ts, I have seen maintenance therapies being used. Yes.
Okay. Harold, any reaction? I mean, I don't know what you think, whether you guys are average or above average or below average, whatever that means in this context, but
yeah, I mean, there's a number of payers that we serve, right? And so the challenge that you're always going to run into, right, is where the guidance isn't clear or there's nothing out there, then folks are going to do the best they can to cover it, but you're going to have deviations, generally speaking, in how coverage is sort of handled. A lot of it, at least initially, right, I think that the challenge that you run into with CAR T products, right, is what is success, what is failure. We just had the long conversation around the clinical data and what that meant, and everyone seemed to be struggling about when you should use it, what's effect and what's a failure. But yet, from a payer perspective, right, they're going to be exposed to this large amount of dollars, quite frankly, and who actually knows what's going to play out. And so, yeah, I mean, you're certainly going to see a variation on the different approaches that payers take, but in the absence of data, right, then you're kind of left to, a payer's left to making their own determination or looking to some of them partnering together to make their own determination on the best way to handle it.
Is this one CAR T and then you're done? Is that coming from the plan sponsors or from the plans to try to build a benefit that would appeal to plan sponsors? Who's the leading edge on that?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, or for either of you. Do you guys, if you had, I mean, in that conversation that goes on between plan sponsors and plans, whose idea is it to say one CAR T and then that you're done?
Well, so a lot of folks, I would argue, are going to look at the data, right? And if the data really doesn't show that there's anything to support the use of another follow-up CAR T, then there's going to be some payers that just say, listen, the data doesn't support it at this point. I want to provide coverage to a patient, but at the end of the day, if there's no data there, I'm not going to pay $500,000 or something of that nature that's out there, right? One would argue that should be what a clinical study for, and that's what the manufacturer should be covering to see what that happens, which you see in other places of oncology, right? So that's how I think most payers are probably many payers are going to probably look at.
I agree with that stance as well. I mean, when I'm drafting policies or when I'm asking someone's asking me to review their existing policies, I mean, this information is taken from perhaps the clinical trial,
Right.
what patients, the inclusion exclusion criteria, what published studies are out there, the NCCN compendia, and between like the published studies and the available data that's out there, if there's nothing to support it, I think they err on the side of caution and say it's still an investigational area.
So Vincent, I was coming to you anyway, and you got your hand up. Does the system work well enough to say, okay, we don't have any data of one CAR T after another, and so the payer community being conservative, or whatever, you can put whatever label you want on that. And this is not unique to oncology. This is the way the world works in insurance and evidence largely. But is it possible to get those trials up and going to study the sequential use of CAR Ts, or do we have a problem that just doesn't really work well and clinical experts are pushing for it before there's evidence that can be judged by payers? What's the right way to manage this in the coming year?
I think we should ask for evidence, given the costs, the cumbersome nature of the treatment, the pressures we put on the patients. It's just reasonable to ask for evidence that if you're going to recommend 2 CAR Ts, it's just upon us as investigators to do those trials and really see if there is a benefit or not. Otherwise, we're giving false hope to patients.
And just to add, oh, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
Just to add to that too, these aren't therapies, as you all know, these aren't therapies that come without side effects.
Exactly.
These therapies like are associated with significant side effects. So to like ensuring like that you're advocating for this patient and you're looking in their best interest to ensure that, yes, not only will it be efficacious and give them, an improved like quality of life and also ensure that the side effects aren't going to be worse than the treatment, especially since you're getting it a second time.
Yeah, Dr. Gupta, by the way, I apologize because I can't see you. I probably am not thinking enough of asking you a question, but don't forget, don't worry. I haven't forgotten that you are with us. And actually, if you do want to jump in, please feel free either to interrupt or to raise your hand, your electronic hand if you're able to do so. David, or Tom, I was going to circle back to you. How does this sound to the patient mind, this discussion about how payers will be looking at the evidence in the short term, the request for further evidence before a second CAR T would be used? How does it resonate with you guys?
Tom, do you want to go first?
Well, I think the more options we have, the better it is. We're always hoping for an extended life. And so if one CAR T fails and we can get into a clinical trial that has a different CAR T, I think we would, or at least I would welcome that.
A clinical trial, thanks, Tom. A clinical trial is different than just having access to sequential CAR Ts. I'm concerned because I think there was 3 to 6% death rate.
Yes.
With them, and the cytokine storms are nothing to sneeze at, even though the doctors and nurses have learned better how to manage it when it happens. The neurotoxicities scare me, and so I personally would prefer that we run trials and find out, and then Tom or I could volunteer for the trial if we want to find out if sequential CAR Ts produce a result. But especially at, $420,000 for the drug and another couple $100,000 to administer the drug and the follow-up, seems like the manufacturers should finance trials.
Okay. I think that was actually very helpful. I think we captured some important thoughts in there. I do want to, yeah, Vincent, go ahead.
I had a question, and it's for Harold and Melissa. Are you finding that payers, just like they are reluctant with sequential CAR Ts, would they have the same view to, we really haven't shown that when one BCMA approach fails, another works, that both belantamab and ide-cel were approved in people refractory to other treatments, but not a BCMA strategy. So would they take a stance that you could have not had a prior BCMA because that's the population that we have data on? Or are they going to be more willing to, I hope, agree that let the clinicians decide since they're both approved?
Again, I think for the commercial patients, they may have a more stringent approach. The Medicare, the Medicaid patients, I mean, it'll be whatever guided by the compendia, by the FDA indication. But for their commercial patients, they may consider putting some stopgaps there, just because there is a lack of data in certain areas. I don't know, Harold, have you seen anything different?
No, I think there's just generally speaking, right? Like the payers want to take care of, beyond popular belief and what's said, payers want to take care of their patients, their members, right? They're like their family. But the data's got to be there, right? So if there's not data there, then to me, that continues means that's a trial. And that is historically what a manufacturer does, and what manufacturers claim why they have to they have to charge the drug so much. So to me, if those are things that should be done, I mean, I think those are things that clinical trials are the most appropriate for, to see what happens.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this isn't really an area where you might see like real world evidence coming into play, because I think there's some other areas where there's no published studies, but there's no clinical trial set up for a certain treatment, but real world evidence might show us something different. I think with this right now, we're not there. And I completely agree with Harold. For the payer world, anything that doesn't align with the published data out there is automatically put into like the investigational bucket. And then coverage becomes a completely different situation.
I think, Vincent's question most specifically, and just to make sure, I think we were all interpreting it right. He was saying, I think, so a patient has had Blenrep and then has had progression, and then a BCMA CAR T. It's just because it's in the same class. Clinicians think of these classes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of, and for a payer, the label will say triple class refractory. It won't say and who has not had prior BCMA therapy. So it won't be in the label. Vincent's question is, will payers go in and say, oh, well, but they did have a BCMA therapy before, and so they can't have this one? My guess is that they would not do that. But I think that, am I right, Vincent? I think that was the specific question. And I wasn't sure that you guys.
It's a concern that patients have, and that's why I was saying, like, CAR T first. I'm going to take my choice.
If you had to take a choice, right?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure how that'll play out, right? I would tell you that just what's done in the past may not be done in the future. I think that the cost of the drugs are causing payers to scrutinize things a lot more than they used to. So I don't really have a good answer to that at this point.
Melissa, go ahead.
I was just looking at in all transparency, I was looking at the clinical trial really quickly right now. And based on what I see here, I don't think that they would implement that, that like you couldn't that you'd be denied a CAR T because you got Blenrep.
So let's actually, real quickly, I want to dive into something around the clinical trial eligibility criteria, which you were just looking at, and then zoom back out to talk about the pricing and the payment options. Obviously, we're leaving some best for last. But again, a very standard feature of the way that insurance coverage works is that if the FDA says it's covered for adults with this condition, payers will look at the criteria used in the clinical trials to decide whether they should say you have to have these kinds of clinical kind of status findings or blood test results in order to qualify for insurance coverage. So in a way, you can call it defining some of the loose terms in the FDA label, or you can call it narrowing the coverage from the FDA label.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to ask you and Harold, as I look at both the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, I see things like ECOG status.
Mm-hmm.
I see things like, actually for Blenrep, they could not have had previous BCMA therapies. That was an exclusion criterion for the study.
Oh.
So I don't know if I want to go into each of these specific ones, but in general, will payers in this kind of situation, brand new treatments, brand new class of treatments, kind of not a lot of other choices for patients, will they use these clinical trial criteria to narrow, define the coverage? And if so, in what specific ways do you think they will do that? What terms, age, ECOG status, previous treatment, kind of other things? What should we think about as what will happen and what might be reasonable or not reasonable? Melissa, because you see the broad range of a lot of things, why don't I ask you to go first? What do you think they're going to do?
Sure. So just to clarify, making this very narrow, like the criteria very narrow, would apply really to the commercial patients,
right?
Because for the Medicare, the Medicaid patients, they would be as long as their indication is under the NCCN compendia or the FDA language, which the FDA language, as you already said, is sometimes very loose. They might be in a bucket where it's a little bit easier to get the coverage. So for instance, let's say for the commercial patients, right? So the plan may be a little bit more stringent, and I have seen situations where they do say ECOG of 0 to 1 or whatever the clinical trial clinical trial says. So I think for Abecma was 0 to 1. I think for most of the CAR Ts it's 0 to 1 because you want the patient to, of course, be healthy enough. Should they have any toxicities, they can withstand those toxicities. It's typical to see situations such as the patient will not be eligible for CAR T if they have an active infection, and they'll list like fungal infections, certain viral infections that would preclude them from CAR T. They must have adequate organ function, so pulmonary function, adequate renal function, and that's really like for the safety of the patient, right? If the patient is too sick to get these therapies, ideally you'd hope you're seeing this from the perspective of like what's best for the patient. So right. I could tell you for certain, like the ECOG, the organ toxicity, the infection.
The one I might highlight for Abecma is previous allogeneic stem cell transplant. That was an exclusion from the trial. Mm-hmm. Would a payer say, therefore, a patient who's had a stem cell treatment is not eligible? I actually don't know if
they might.
That could be, from a clinical expert's perspective, that might be a red light anyway. But sometimes these exclusion criteria are not set up to protect patients. They're set up to magnify the ability of the trial to show a difference, right. Look for outcome, for harms. So we all know that there's a tension there. And I didn't know if there were any in this list of exclusion criteria like the previous stem cell or others that the clinical experts feel that's something that the payer should really just let the clinical experts sort out and not let insurance coverage be the deciding factor of whether a patient qualifies for this treatment or not.
And I think what was excluded were allogeneic stem cell transplant, which is very different from autologous.
Right. I just want to make sure. Yeah, I thought that might be a red light anyway. So
and so with the risk of provoking new graft versus host disease. Some of these patients are on chronic immunosuppression. And additionally, there really has not been any great evidence of the value of allogeneic transplant in multiple myeloma. So I thought that was reasonable, but I don't think autologous transplant patients were excluded unless they were within 30 days or within 100 days of
100 days, you're
Yeah.
right. Good. Yeah, that was for Blenrep. I don't think it was actually an exclusionary criterion for Abecma. So again, I've both gone into the weeds and kind of tried to draw out this general tension as coverage starts to get written down. They will graft over sometimes inclusion or exclusion criteria from the trials. And from the clinical expert perspective, any guiding principles for how to do that? We can always say they should check with clinical experts to make sure that they are, in a sense, true red lights that should protect the patient and should not be left under the discretion of the clinician. I can imagine ECOG status as being something that maybe clinicians don't want to have as an exclusion from insurance coverage. They want to be able to talk to the patient about the relative risks and benefits. But what is your guys' view, the clinical experts, on that? What principles should payers use in translating the clinical trial criteria over to their insurance?
I think for both belantamab and even Idicel, even though it says more than 4 lines of therapy, I think the label is pretty good. I think if the insurers stick to the label, the rest can be left to the clinician's discretion. ECOG performance status is okay to add, but that's such a subjective thing that clinicians would just write whatever number they want to get the patient on the treatment. So, whether you put in parameters for progression, transfusion requirements, everything can be adjusted. So I think insurers are better off just, if they want to draw a line, just draw the line where the label is. Yeah, draw a line in terms of like follow the label. And for now.
Okay. Anita, anything different?
No, I agree with that.
Okay. Any last comments from Melissa or Harold before I pivot to price and payment?
Sure. I don't know.
Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
This is very idealistic of me to think, but it would be really nice if in like some world we could have some sort of like continuity in terms of like what payers would cover for their patients, because patients can change plans, right? So it's not uncommon for them to switch from one insurance plan to another. And it's really, I imagine, like soul crushing for a patient to have like a difference in coverage just because they had to change plans because their spouse changed jobs or something that wasn't within their control. So it would be really nice if there could be some sort of like uniform coverage across the board, but I'm not sure how ideal, how realistic that would be.
Well, the single payer makes it easy, but that brings up other goblins in some people's minds. But it is something that actually these kinds of conversations that we're having, we're not making coverage decisions, but we're kind of trying to transmit a general sense of some of the perspectives on coverage that might lead to more consistency across health plans. Certainly if people like you, Melissa, take that message to them. I mean, that's kind of, we all have to be part of that discussion with payers as much as we are with the manufacturers around pricing and other things. All right, so let's talk about price. Dr. Gupta, here you go. Thank you for being patient. And I'm not gonna put everything on you because I know that it's not fair in multiple reasons for you to try to kind of represent the entire pharmaceutical industry. But just with the experience with new treatments for multiple myeloma, and I am going to talk briefly about CAR-Ts. When Kymriah came out, the company has pricing and then it has uptake expectations. And if the experience with the first round of CAR-Ts was that the uptake was much lower than they had thought or hoped, and that was partly because of Medicare payment issues and lots of other issues. But the next time they come around, are they thinking, well, we're only going to get 10% of the eligible patients treated, so we have to have a very high price in order to make the math work? Would it work just as well if we had a better system and 50 to 80% of the eligible patients could get it and then the price would be much lower? Or would a drug company say, heck no, if we can get the price here for 10%, let's leave it there for the 80% uptake as well. Why would we want to drop the price just because more people are going to be able to take it? How can we learn about this? Because it is starting to feel, not starting, as you know, it feels to a lot of people like the cost of these treatments in multiple myeloma, in this case, is stacking up in a way that just feels really unsustainable and could hurt those people who are trying to afford health insurance that we're trying to keep in our mind's eye. Apologies for the very long-winded question, but what can we do with the concept of pricing that will make this feel more affordable to the health system and to the patients who need these drugs?
I think it's a very interesting question and a very important question, Steve. I will have to look at the experts to give us more guidance on how it can be done. All I could do is maybe share GSK's way of looking at it, which is, when we are looking at pricing decisions, they are consistent with our strategy to balance the value of innovation as well as providing affordable access for patients. So we tend to use this value-based pricing framework where we seek to quantify the clinical, the economic, as well as the humanistic value a product provides, in addition to key market environmental factors, including patient access. So I think there's a framework and a system in place that we use to evaluate. It's not based on any single health technology assessment methodology, but is designed more at a holistic approach for pricing the products so that we can drive the value for patients. That's what we are very keen on doing while balancing innovation with affordable prices.
So that's, I don't know you personally and I can't even see you. So I should have prefaced this entire session by pointing out that I sometimes ask challenging questions that are not meant to be taken personally. But in the conversation that the country's having, there are a lot of talking points. One is that payers use evidence to make sure that people only receive appropriate treatments. And another is that drug companies price to reflect the value and the needs for investment in future innovation. And yet we still kind of feel broken in a lot of ways, where the high prices seem to be tied to restrictions in access, maybe not so much in oncology, but in other places. And another feature that is very specific to this area is the uncertainty, because a lot of these treatments are approved on the basis of single-arm trials without a lot of long-term data. Do you feel like a lower price, if we had a formal system where drugs could be launched at a lower price, maybe even just cost recovery or with a small profit, and then with a formal option to have the evidence looked at after 2 years and have the price reset to the value that it's providing patients, would that be a bad idea for the industry, or would it seem like a non-starter? What do you think, Dr. Gupta first, maybe?
I think, we want to work collectively with the patients, with the advocacy groups, with the economic health assessments group to identify an optimal approach. Pricing, in my opinion, is quite complex, especially for a drug like Blenrep. We need to take into consideration the patient weight, the need for the quantity of the drug changes, and then, there's then also the dose modifications that are required. And as you rightly said, you begin with a very niche indication, and then there are opportunities to generate data that would allow us to, expand the patient population that can be benefit from the treatments or at least have potential access to the treatment while moving it into earlier lines and in a randomized setting. So I think you do over time generate more confidence and evidence that would allow us to make an informed decision on the usage of the drug, including sequencing, which was something that was being talked about by Dr. D'Souza as well as Dr. Rajkumar. And we are doing this work. We're trying to generate data, and I do hope there will be opportunities for us to continue having these discussions where, as the level of evidence to the overall benefit risk of taking a treatment versus the other increases, we can make an informed decision on the appropriate pricing for the patient.
And I feel like I should, again, maybe have prefaced my questioned to you by the fact that, you know, in our review, which does the best we can do with the early evidence near the time of launch, Blenrep was priced in alignment with its benefits to patients at a relatively fair level. According to the model, there were still questions, according to the CEPAC, in addition, around the overall clinical effectiveness data and the uncertainty about that. But the pricing did not set out, it was not highly out of alignment in a sense, much like we see with some other treatment areas. But, you know, I've kind of put a couple of things on the table about how we see the pricing, and it's fit with an overall affordable kind of platform going forward. Harold and Melissa, again, and maybe Harold in particular, because you do talk to plan sponsors, or you certainly hear from people who do. And I keep hearing from people who talk to small employers in particular, but to others, that they are really worried that they're, you know, on the private side, that this is a real challenge, and that some plan sponsors are looking for ways not to cover cell and gene therapies like they used to not try to cover organ transplantations because they felt like they just could not afford it. So what's our way through this wicket? What do you think?
Yeah, so, you know, I think it was said before where you asked the question around things getting approved with not a lot of data. And the comment was, more data comes along to justify it. Well, it's a little bit difficult, right, for a payer to say, well, the drug has been approved. We're not completely sure, but we're going to do some more studies to sort of build it out. But we think that you should pay that price, right, out of the gate, and later on we can prove out that that price made a lot of sense. I think that's a hard thing to sort of to consume, quite frankly, right, or sort of accept. From my perspective, though, there's a few things. At the end of the day, so Steve, you brought this up around pricing. I think there has to be a much more collaborative conversation on manufacturers. And some are doing this today, which is good. So this isn't, I'm not going to paint a broad brush on everyone, but manufacturers to have a proactive conversation with payers in alignment and figure out the best way to be able to provide coverage and what that looks like beforehand, because I think many of them are feeling like, to your point, I have my diabetes patients, I have gene therapy out there, I have all these other things. I don't have an infinite amount of dollars, and I'm put in a position where I have to choose. In areas where there's data or it's not necessarily there, those are clear areas where when I look at my overall population or patients that they serve, that they know that they're going to get their biggest bang for their buck, and they can justify and show the data around the coverage that they're providing for other products out there. And so to me, it's really about manufacturers having a much clearer dialogue. Some of them, again, are doing it well today. Some maybe have some work to do on what that looks like, and come to some agreement before, versus just getting hit with this price and we'll get the data later on. So if you want to know how payers feel, they don't feel that there's any conversation with them beforehand. There's no insight into what to do. There's no insight into pricing, and the data is always on proxy, which I get is small populations, but they're put into a bit of a corner, and they have to make tough decisions. And so to me, that open dialogue before and understanding that's going to be important, because it's not particularly happening a ton right now.
All right, thanks. Vincent, Anita, or David or Tom, if you're still on. David, you can use your other day job hat if you want to at this stage. As we think about it, it's you know, oncology is the canary in the coal mine in some ways, because we start to see the lumping of different treatments on top of each other. And again, it provides patient benefits in some other areas with autoimmune treatments, perhaps, and others now getting combination therapy started, biologics for other things. But are we headed in any kind of right direction here with oncology costs and the benefits to patients? And if not, what do we do about it?
Well, Harold actually flagged this earlier, maybe 45 minutes ago, and that is, right now we're dealing with drugs, these cell and gene therapies for relatively small populations. But Francis Collins says we're looking at a gene therapy that could be a cure for sickle cell. There are 100,000 people with sickle cell disease in the country. If we price it, you know, they're going for between 400 and 2.1 million for Zolgensma, which you said was a fair price for value. So let's say the sickle cell treatment is $1 million. That's $100 billion that we have to find. And most of that will be in Medicaid and Medicare. As a nation, I do not know how we absorb those prices. I think we're going to buckle the system. And so I'm very concerned that while we're dealing with these small populations, we don't have to deal with the overall budget impact, but this moment in time will pass, and we'll be into this other moment where there are all these magnificent new therapies and no way to pay for them. So what do we do about that? I believe that we have to rely more on value pricing. We have to have the government negotiate over the prices of drugs because we're not going to be able to absorb this cost. And we can't just pick up and move, $100 billion, a lot of which will be public funding from, other needs, and just give it to drug companies. We're going to have to find a way to achieve the balance that I think, again, Harold talked about, where we're balancing the value. No, it was Ms. Gupta, where we achieve the balance that says we're going to continue to be able to incentivize innovation and reward it, but make sure that prices are affordable and accessible.
All right. Oh, Harold, go ahead. And then I'm going to try to move us rapidly into research, and then we can have you guys.
One thing I would say, right, is if everyone comes to the table, just like when we talk about gene therapies, and David mentioned the cost of Zolgensma, right? There's cases where it actually does make sense. And today the healthcare system, it's within itself it's structured to treat chronic treatment, not potentially curative. So I think there's a model that you have to look at on how you transform that. And I do think there's ability to do that. But with that being said, the concept has to be that everyone has to stick by that their drug works. And if it doesn't, what comes back to the healthcare system? So I do think there's ways to do that, but a lot of that's going to require open dialogue and an open conversation around what the price of it should actually be.
I also wanted to note, and it was too bad because we thought we were going to be able to have someone who had been working at CMS and had been kind of intimately involved in the policy making when the first CAR T came through. And you all have probably seen some of the stories about how that was kind of a grinding of gears, where, what CMS had as an ability to help pay for Kymriah and the way they could pay it just did not fit with the system, with the uptake that was looked for. And so a lot of patients and hospitals just felt like it was not working for them, for hospitals, for patients, for anybody. And so out of that came some potential options to increase the way that Medicare can pay in the short term as a new technology add-on payment that our final report will probably touch on, at least because it's been written about in the public domain. But there's a more radical idea that I wanted to quickly bounce off of you, which was basically that this isn't going to work for Medicare at least, and maybe even in the private market, that these high-cost one-time treatments are just going to prove too challenging to stretch out payments or to do all the kinds of things that conceptually we'd like to do. And one proposal is that Medicare should, in a sense, carve out CAR T and other cell and gene therapies so that there's no more buy and bill by hospitals or providers, and the government itself would, negotiate or figure out a price for it, buy it directly and provide it or give it to the hospitals, I guess. So there's some pretty radical ideas out there about how CMS would deal with this so that we don't keep having a problem in which great innovation, partly because of the price in the short term, but just because of the payment mechanisms, can't get to the patients who could benefit. Does anybody have a particular perspective on that before we talk about research and then move towards the final statements? Not Harold, Vincent.
Oh, thanks, Steve. I just want to make a couple of points. One is that contrary to what you were suggesting, which is, set the price low, do the trials, and then we'll redecide. I think companies are actually thinking now with what happened with Revlimid and, price increases,
Right.
that it's better to price it like really, really high from the beginning. And then they would rather not, either be in a position to lower the cost or not raise the price. So I think it's front loading is the name of the game now. So that's why these drugs are all going to be priced high to start with, regardless. And so value-based pricing from the outside becomes very important, which means Medicare negotiating. And so it's all like coming back to the same thing. The second point is that we as physicians also have a role to play in this, as we have multiple BCMA treatments, multiple CD38 treatments coming up, multiple bispecifics. We have no idea what costs how much. And, for example, I don't think physicians know that if you're a 60 kg person, isatuximab will be half as expensive as daratumumab, and they're both like probably interchangeable. And you could save society a bundle if people just dose them according to the price. But no one's even aware of the costs of these or something. So how do we even, and if you ask physicians, they'll say, I have no idea what anything costs, let alone how much patients are paying for it. So those are things that are on us. And if we have the tools to be able to select treatments that are the most cost effective, that'll really help physicians. And then final point I would make is that let's not forget that as drugs become more and more and more expensive, that there is a transfer of wealth. Everybody can save only a little bit of their income every year, and they save for their 50 years of employment only to have it all taken away by one illness with 1 month's prescription. Then it just goes right back to those of us who literally own the companies.
Yes. I think that's a very fair perspective and part of the challenge. Yeah. Okay, thank you for those statements. I just have to tick a few more boxes, and then I want to already start to let you think, though, about the way we like to wrap up our policy roundtables is to invite each of you to have a final one-sentence closing argument, if you will. It can be a request that you would make of some specific stakeholder to do something different or to keep doing it. It can be a theme that you want hammered deep into the marrow of the final report. It can be a complaint, it can be anything. So think of your final one-sentence closing statement. I have to ask the clinical experts real quickly because this is a part of our final report. For these patients, the triple class kind of refractory quad failures, what % of these patients do you think ideally clinically should receive consideration for Blenrep and the CAR T? I mean, not in the real world how many will get it, but like if we had the ability to basically offer it to the right number of patients, is it 100% of patients in that stage should get one or the other? Is there a reason that you would want to hold off and not treat 100%? What would you say?
Yeah, I would absolutely consider this as one of the main classes, like we have talked about the 3 big classes, as one of the classes of drugs every multiple myeloma patient should be considered for.
Okay. Vincent, is there any reason to?
No, I would
qualify
agree. I think it's pretty much the same. We should consider it for all patients as long as they're eligible and they're safe to get it. The only caveat is just like we have learned that not everybody who needs both daratumumab and isatuximab, or both carfilzomib and ixazomib, or both thalidomide and lenalidomide. We may in the future with data find out that everyone should get a BCMA approach, but X% should try both, X% maybe one or the other, depending on their outcomes from whatever data that comes out in the future. We should make every attempt to identify patients who are unlikely to respond to one if the other doesn't work. So we spare the patients the side effects and society the costs and everything else.
Okay, that sounds okay. That's great. All right, because the time is short, I do want to capture something about what we would want to say. If we could, and this doesn't now need to be your final statement, what would you want to do with research? And it doesn't have to be the long haul, what we really need, even in the short term, what's the short-term research agenda that's most important? And who needs to take action to make, if one party needs to step up and do something, who would it be? Is it the NIH needs to fund this kind of study because no one else is going to do it? Or is it PCORI, or what would it be? And you heard the question earlier about, do we need to start to quickly study CAR-Ts in earlier lines of therapy so that is that the right first agenda item for the next kind of research wave? What do we want to do? Vincent, let me start with you because I know both of you are academicians, but I know you think about this a lot. So what's the research agenda look like?
So I would say, I wrote a paper with Philippe Moreau in the Lancet looking at this very question. There's a lot of trials that we do just for regulatory approval, which we have to do. Those are necessary trials. But I think one of the key research questions that now physicians and physician leaders should ask, and NIH should fund because companies won't, is start to ask the question whether a fixed duration of therapy for 1 year can beat treatment until progression. Right now, all the trials are like, treat until progression for both arms, which means you'll never know whether you could get the same benefit with a year's worth of therapy like we do. So somebody has to start asking, is the holy grail for myeloma 6 cycles and CAR-T and you're done? Or 6 cycles, a transplant and a CAR-T and you're done? And that will provide value to society, which is like, we are going for durable response that will last 5, 6 years, 7 years, and you spare all of the 7 years of maintenance therapy and everything else. But those trials are not being done. Everybody has trials for, it's DARA indefinite versus DARA plus lenalidomide indefinite plus DARA plus len plus bortezomib indefinite. So the real fixed duration versus continuous is critical from both patient standpoint and whether we cure or not as a goal, as well as cost-wise.
Okay, thank you very much. Anita, what's your research horizon look like?
I think looking again at what the clinical trials for these 3 drugs have reported so far, we don't know what race was. We know only about 5% of patients that are Black are going on myeloma clinical trials, maybe even a little less than that in recent years. So I think I really want to see some what we call as real world data on what is its, how does it fare when we use it in our broad group of patients. Same with age, the median age in these trials was in the late 50s, early 60s. The median age of myeloma diagnosis is about 70 years. So I think that when we look at, what is going to be the actual efficacy of these drugs when we use it in practice, I think we need to get some real world evidence, and these types of studies is what I would like to see. Other research questions, I think Dr. Kaufman mentioned earlier, using these treatments earlier, but then also taking into account the cost. A transplant costs $150,000, and you're substituting it with a treatment that costs 3 times that price. Although, if you take into account maintenance treatment after transplant, maybe that all adds up and it's equivalent. So those types of studies, I think also have to be taken into account with the cost effectiveness of each of these treatment packages, so to speak. And then finally, do these drugs retain their efficacy after, if you have used one BCMA directed treatment and then you're trying to use another one, are they equally efficacious or not? But I think my closing statement would be that, I'm really excited about these drugs. They are very effective, but they are cost prohibitive. And so when you look at, the affordability for the broader myeloma population, and remember, we are still only talking about US patients, the most developed, richest country in the world. Think about this question outside the US. is it really meant for the broader myeloma population? And if not, then what can we do to make it so?
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we are moving into the final statement phase. Again, one sentence, please. Keep it as short as you can so we can get through, and then the CEPAC will have its last comments. I'm going to end with the patient. So Harold, can I ask you to go first?
Yeah, definitely. So, Steve, I'm probably gonna take a more bullish approach here. I think that I still see a lot of positives, right? We want to certainly continue to drive innovation and support that for better treatments out there. Really just looking at the need for the healthcare system to work more collaboratively, to make sure not only treatment is streamlined, but also the pricing makes sense. And I do think that we can make some good strides to get there. But there's got to be that partnership, or else without that, right, you leave to some of the fragmentation that you're seeing today, especially with some of these therapies.
All right, thank you very much. Melissa? Sorry, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. So I just want to echo what Harold said. I mean, I think it's really important to maintain open dialogue with the manufacturers and ensure that we have an understanding of what support manufacturers can provide, what support is expected from the payer side as well, so that we can best serve the patients. Additionally, the other thing would be being able to provide CAR-T programs to the smaller community, so that patients don't necessarily have to go to these larger academic centers, which that in and of itself could be cost prohibitive.
Got it. Thanks a lot. Dr. Gupta, I'm going to first thank you and your company, because again, you were collaborating all the way through the report process, and you alone as a company chose to participate in the final policy roundtable. I think the public respects that. They know that you might not always get easy questions. They know that you don't know everything that you might get asked, but they also respect that you're willing to be part of a transparent discussion around these issues. And so I want to thank you for that, and I'd welcome your final statement.
Thank you so much, Steve. I mean, I have to first begin by saying thank you to you all. I think for me, it's been a very informative session. I've learned a lot, and that is extremely important because we do this for patients. We want to make a meaningful impact for the patients. And I believe with the collaboration with the clinicians and the cross-functional panel that we have here, we can continue ensuring that not only we generate data that is helpful to the patients, but is also relevant in the real world. Because I think, the point that Dr. D'Souza brought up about representation of subgroup analysis that are relevant to the real world, such as maybe the African-American patient populations, we are always focused at GSK to ensure there's fair representation and these analyses can be presented. So to me, this has been a great learning experience, and I am very confident that with the continued collaboration and the ongoing research, belamaf in combination with other agents can be brought into earlier lines of treatment, as we have the potential to address the unmet medical needs in combinations with standard of care as well as the novel agents. If I may just add, something for us to consider in the future.
Very briefly,
yep,
please.
One sentence, I assure you, one sentence. I think it might have, I found, listening to the patients' feedback and their experience was very helpful, and I always benefit from them. So maybe while taking the topic for discussion, I would have found it helpful if someone who had received Blenrep in the real world scenario could have also had the opportunity to share their experience. So maybe something for consideration, the agents and drugs that are being discussed, if we can have patients who have received them also participate, that will be great.
Thank you very much. Okay, Anita.
Who, me? I just spoke.
Oh, wait, did I start with the clinical Oh, I'm sorry. I was rounding back. No, this is your final statement.
Oh, if you need time, Steve, I will happily give my time, because I think I said everything I wanted to say, and I might have taken more time earlier.
You're brilliant and lovely. Thank you. Well, we'll come back, and I want to thank all of you for your participation. Vincent, anything you'd like to add as a final statement?
Thanks for having me. I think ICER is doing an unbelievably good job, and I'm really proud to be part of this meeting today.
Thank you so much. All right, patients, take us home here where we began. A final statement that you'd like to leave us with. Tom, can I ask you to go first?
Sure. I just would like to say that CAR-T has had a profoundly positive effect in my life and for my family's life. Thank you.
And thank you for participating so much. David?
I want to thank everybody who has participated today. I've learned a lot, some things I wish I hadn't. The one sentence is, I remember back to the old days when IBM computers took up a whole room. And I think that we are in the same phase now with CAR-T and gene therapies and cell therapies. We need distributed manufacturing that will get the treatment closer to patients. It will lower the cost. And as we go deeper down this path of science, that I will be able to go somewhere nearby, have someone harvest my cells, take them to the basement, treat them, and give them back to me right there on site. And I hope that we soon begin to question the model we're using now for manufacturing and delivering these cells and genes therapies to people, and that we move to a distributed model that will be cheaper and closer to the patients.
Thanks. And you're right, we did not get into that aspect of CAR-T kind of global policy, where I know there are movements in Europe to try to move this into the clinical realm and to not have the manufacturers directly involved. Maybe for another meeting in the future, because the CAR-Ts are going to keep coming, and that will be great and a continuing challenge at the same time. So on behalf of the entire CEPAC and from ICER's perspective, I just want to thank every single member of our policy roundtable. You guys, many of you have helped us from the beginning of this report all the way through. You have given us tremendous insights today with a lot of important things that affected the thinking of the CEPAC and that will strongly influence our final report. But you yourselves are powerful voices in the issues that we've talked about today. So thank you for spending the time and for being with us today. It was wonderful. Let me hand it back over to the chair of the Midwestern CEPAC, Reem, who can invite final comments from the CEPAC members themselves, and I'll have just a very short coda at the end. Reem, back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I just want to thank everybody one more time. This was a very engaging session, a lot of really important discussion and excellent points that have been brought up. I'm actually going to say my final comments at the end. So I'm going to start with the CEPAC members again in a different order this time. Let me start with Stuart Winston.
Thanks. Both from the expert call last week and today's meeting, the panel was extraordinarily well served by the clinical experts, the content presenters, and the ICER principals that helped us. And our patient representatives were especially helpful. Really top-notch meeting. Thanks to all.
Thank you, Stuart. Rachel?
Sure. So also I wanted to thank everyone for being here with us today, particularly David Mitchell and David Hendricks and Tom for their very helpful comments. But I wanted to say that this is one of the meetings which makes me so hopeful for how far we've come in treating this disease and the new opportunities that we have for patients, but also the real barriers for many patients, particularly in terms of the racial disparities that these new treatments can exacerbate. And I know it's on all of us and in all of our minds to be thinking about how to redress those.
Thanks, Rachel. Tim?
Yeah, I want to thank ICER staff and the patients and everyone for their hard work. And I want to pick up on what Rachel just said. And I was struck by, in the meeting, it was pretty far into the meeting before we actually talked about disparities and the equity aspects of this. And I want to sort of put out a challenge that we be a little bit more explicit about that in our criteria, and we had a fabulous discussion about it in the policy roundtable. But maybe we can bring it more explicitly into the criteria discussion, because we talk about this in our, challenges in how we look at the criteria for the medications and the pharmaceuticals. But if a person doesn't have, it was well pointed out along the way that if a person doesn't have access to these high cost drugs, then what good does it do? And if the insurance doesn't pay for it, and they don't have access to it, then that's a really big challenge. Medicare and Medicaid may pay for it, but we have a lot of uninsured, especially in my state. We haven't expanded Medicaid, so that's a big challenge. So I just want to throw that challenge out there and think about disparities in rural America and for African Americans and people of color, low income people. So that was just something that really struck in my head the last couple hours.
Thank you very much, Tim. Bradley?
Yeah, I'm gonna say this was a very timely review for me. And on a personal note, my wife's sister was just diagnosed with multiple myeloma 3 weeks ago as a result of a undiagnosed upper arm extremity fracture. She actually lives in Wisconsin and may be seeing you, Dr. Jacomar, in the future, because she's in Black Rivers Fall, not too far from Mayo. So I was really impressed with the clinical experts. And I'll tell you, having experienced a personal, it really brought home kind of, these decisions that we're making in terms of this value trade-off and the patient aspect. And, you kind of really want to root for these CAR T therapies, but, at almost $500,000 a throw, I mean, it's a real struggle to find the affordability issue. Very impressive. And the patient advocates, I think this is one of the most reasonable, rational discussions with patient advocates. So thank you.
Thank you, Bradley, and I hope your sister-in-law does well. Jill?
Thank you, ICER, and the economic team, particularly for likely one of the toughest exercises ICER has done so far. I'm particularly grateful to Brett for explaining some really tough economic concepts in a really excellent way. Also, thank you for allowing me to contribute in a small way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Albert?
I think Albert had to. Oh, you're here.
I made it back. Thank you to, in particular, David and Tom. Your descriptions of what it's like to live with multiple myeloma and go through the treatments was really profound. And thank you, of course, to the experts, to Say and Brett, for leading the analysis, and is really thoughtful. So again, as usual, we're faced with really difficult choices for patients, healthcare system, society, when it comes to drug treatments for multiple myeloma. What do we do with these innovative and effective therapies that are, in the case of CAR T, extremely expensive? I don't know if this was brought up, but for multiple myeloma, given its demographic, this question is particularly salient for, I know we kind of brush over Medicare, but Medicare is probably bearing the bulk of the expense of these drugs. There's no, the coverage may not be questioned and people may be able to fly through and get it covered, but society, all of us are bearing the cost of CAR T therapies because we pay for Medicare. So maybe that's an opportunity. Maybe CAR T is the Trojan horse, an opportunity to renew conversations about reforming the way Medicare looks at drug prices. Just a thought, but kind of exciting, but also daunting at the same time.
Thanks, Albert. Ingva?
Thanks for having me. This was very enlightening. It's always a challenge, and kind of a little bit blame the FDA for allowing these accelerated approvals without having an evidence base that we can actually at least get to some idea. It's very clear that there's some folks, some patients who benefit massively from this, right? And so then having to deal with single arm trials, which can sometimes be high quality evidence. We have seen this in Hep C, right? When your response rate is 0%, you don't need a control group. But in general, when we don't have either 0 or 100% responses, this gets to be a huge challenge. It's a lot of leap of faith that we have to do. And I think we have seen this, the way people looked at the evidence today. I'm very grateful to see how this stacks up with my own kind of assessment of the situation. And I'm just hoping that hopefully the pendulum swings a little bit back when we see these fundamental innovations to say, let's create the appropriate evidence early on so we can answer those questions. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Ingvar. Gregory.
Thank you very much. And I want to commend the ICER team, the consultants, for a really outstanding job on the report and on the meeting today. It's been quite stimulating. And I also want to concur with Dr. Raj Kumar, and I'd like to see the oncology community aggressively exploring the outer limits of CAR-T therapy, starting this therapy earlier in the course of the illness, and trying to see if durable responses can actually be obtained with aggressive early therapy. In the long run, that can become more cost effective if we really are able to obtain earlier durable responses. So thank you very much for allowing me to participate today. And I look forward to the next meeting.
Thanks, Gregory. Kurt?
Actually, Reem, maybe you can go to Alan, just because he just messaged he may have to leave. Alan, I don't know if you have time to comment before you leave, but I just saw his chat so we could break ranks if Alan has time. Or he sent that chat just as he was about to leave. So I'll hand it back over to you, sorry.
No problem. We'll go back to Kurt.
Just want to echo thanks to the participants. Yeah, I learned a lot in the process, and thank you to ICER for doing a great job with the very complicated report. So thank you for that. My biggest remaining question is about repeat CAR-T. And so we certainly need more evidence, more data on that. But again, thank you to all the participants for ICER, and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Kurt. Angela? I'm trying to see Angela here. Okay.
I don't see her either.
Okay, let's go to Bijan.
Sorry. Thank you, ICER, for doing this yeoman service. And as always, I learned so much from these meetings. I thank you all the stakeholders for bringing in sharing their perspective, and particularly I thank you the patient members who shared with us their lived experience, and this is always so insightful for us. And it is clear from the meeting as well as from the report that these three myeloma, the evidence for these three myeloma drugs are still sort of emerging. Both the clinical and economic evaluation teams incorporated in the extent evidence as best possible as they could. I truly hope that the future studies will work towards gathering real-world evidence, particularly on cross-comparison between these new therapies. Thank you again.
Thank you, Bijan. And Nick?
Sure. So thanks to everybody for making today again informative and interesting. I kind of left with feeling, on the one hand, really excited, and the other hand, super unnerved, which is that, like, it's as a policy matter, it's pretty easy to understand what to do with marginally effective drugs that cost a lot. You should just pay less for them, right? CAR-T raises this prospect of like a way more difficult problem, which is drugs that, like, maybe in time, they may not be there yet, are worth an exorbitant price, but which are going to collectively break the bank. So on the one hand, I have this like enormous respect for the scientific ingenuity on display here, and also like a deep feeling that we have no model in place for how we're going to pay for all the therapies that are likely to come down the pike.
Thank you, Nick. So I'll end before I give it to Steve. I want to start by thanking ICER for convening us and again continuing to challenge all of us and ask the hard questions. I also want to thank really everybody who's been involved, for outstanding report, the research team, the econ team, the review author, and outstanding presentations. Very clear, made a very complex topic extremely easy to follow. I want to especially thank our patients who shared with us their experience and actually gave context to everything we're talking about, and our clinical experts and payers. But I want to go back to our first meeting as the Midwest CEPAC, where we actually discussed multiple myeloma medications 5 years ago. And I have to say, one thing I'm quite impressed with is to see the progress that we have made as far as continuous communication with different companies. I want to applaud GSK and BMS for wanting to be part of this process and providing additional information that otherwise was not there, and encourage all others to do the same, because just by transparency, continued discussion, even when we disagree, is where we can get to a better place. And with all the hope with these new medications, hopefully be able to discuss the best ways to allow access to those who most need it. Thank you very much. Steve, to you.
Thank you, Reem. Actually, I'm going to let or invite Stacy, because I think we skipped over Stacy, if she's still with us. Yep, she is.
I'm still here.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries, Reem. So just really quickly, as others have said, I learned a lot from the clinical experts and for the folks who put together these reports. It was an excellent meeting. And also the patients and your experiences, and especially hearing from people who had gotten CAR T. I think these meetings are always really tough when you have a drug that has benefit, but the costs are too high. So I think these can be particularly challenging meetings. I will say the one thing that I really did appreciate about the evidence for these drugs was the quality of life evidence, and being able to see really strong evidence of benefits on things that matter to patients, like fatigue and pain, and seeing those improvements. And I would love to see more of that in future ICER reports. And that comes from the sponsors including those measures in their trials. We can't include it if we don't have the data. So thank you, everybody, for a really great meeting.
Oh, thanks, Stacy. I think that was a very good point to bring up. How often have we said, if we only had quality of life outcomes, we could do a little bit more understanding the benefits of these treatments. That was well done by the companies. And it's a mark, certainly, of the engagement of the patient community as well, and kind of pushing those issues and getting the right measures in there. So just a couple of words, because you guys summed it up very well indeed. Again, a thank you to the people on the policy roundtable, the patients, again, and it's easy for the audience watching to think that it's just today, but it is an 8-month relationship, lots of learning, and it takes their time and effort, and it's not insubstantial. So we really want to thank them, because these kinds of conversations need to be driven and guided by those perspectives. In addition, the clinical experts are brilliant people. Caregiver, the way that they care about the individual patient while seeing the big picture is kind of what it's all about. And so they're just wonderful to have as part of our approach. And we know that they have power outside these meetings in the way that they convey to their colleagues and to the broader community how we are all working on this together, and we need to keep getting it right. A couple just things. We didn't really talk that much about the fact that these were accelerated approvals that led to these treatments coming out, and there's a whole kind of revisitation going on around accelerated approval and where it's headed. We are actually putting out a white paper on that within the next couple weeks. The FDA is thinking about it, other groups are thinking about it. But one element is that it serves a critically important function, and we could see it today. It's where patients really don't have other treatment options, where to do the kind of formal long-term outcomes studies would take years and years, and where we have a surrogate endpoint that we feel can be trusted to correlate with that outcome, or that may in fact have its very own intrinsic value to patients, like progression-free survival. And if we can get that right, it really can help the system manage early evidence. But we need to get the evidence both, in some cases, stronger even at the beginning. And then I think, as we discussed, we need methods to make sure that the confirmatory trials, that the longer term outcomes and the sequential kind of use is kind of examined in a expeditious way. And that's not going to be easy, because the incentives for that to happen are just not right now in the system. And so that's what I think people are going to be thinking about around accelerated approval. Last two words. One is around the value votes. It is always hard for patient communities to see these kinds of treatments and to have somebody say that they're low value. And we've actually changed our language to try to accentuate it's low value at current pricing. It means that we can recognize tremendous importance to patients and the broader benefits that we talked about today that were important. And yet the pricing can still be a problem. It can still be too high even for that relative benefit, much less the aggregate kind of cumulative effect of lots of treatments coming. And so we still need to work on getting that part right, and linking that to accelerated approval is kind of something that I think deserves some more attention. But you on the CEPAC did a fantastic job of wrestling with that tension between the real value to patients and their families and the value at the pricing for the health system to be able to keep the right balance. So 5 years ago, when we looked at multiple myeloma treatments for the first time, as part of the very first meeting of the Midwest CEPAC, ICER was doing a lot of things wrong. We had not really gotten it right yet as far as how we engage with patients. We didn't know how to ask the right questions. We didn't know when to ask the right questions. We knew what we were headed to, but they didn't. It was hard to figure out at what stage to look at the data and how to bring in different perspectives. And yet we were trying to learn while doing something that would ultimately be of benefit, even in the short term. And we know that we're still on a learning trajectory, but I have to turn it around and say to the Midwest CEPAC that you guys 5 years ago were part of that experiment, and you still are part of it. And you serve a really important function, I think, for helping our country learn how to talk openly and honestly about these trade-offs and about the goals and hopes and dreams and realities that we all are trying to bake together into a healthcare system that can care for all of us with justice and mercy. And so thank you for being part of that journey with us. I will praise the ICER research team and our collaborators to their faces later. So let me end on that with a really big thank you to the Midwest CEPAC, and I look forward to our next meeting together. Take care all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.